we'll get into the subject a little more later. But through the years, and maybe the last 50 years, we've gone from things like man and wife to the man or wife. And there's a lot of things that have changed in the last 50 years. I wanted to start with that because I think that's one of the funnier quotes that's out there from Aretha Keener. If you can't read it, if it's any hotter than hell, I sure don't want to go there. So, you may have seen some of the commercials lately from Ford, and they kind of use the same thing about and or, and they're using the idea that, you know, they're going to give you a couple of things. In this case here, an activated liftgate and great gas mileage, and then they kind of think about what about bed and breakfast or bed or breakfast, and they're trying to make it sound like the competition has used the or versus the and. They had another one, and they really kind of got down here with, we think about sweet and sour chicken, and they were talking about what about sour chicken. The thing I want to get to as far as 1964, there's a lot of things that are and a lot of things that are or that's kind of developed over the last 50 years. The interesting part here, if you look there, and one of the people I always admired was Jim Gaskell, and always when he was doing funerals, he kind of made the setting back to the time that somebody was born. And so I think you're probably thinking, well, he doesn't look like he's 50, but you know, that's the way it is. But we do have a daughter who has got a lot of new parts, so it makes us a lot younger every time we're with her. So the other part is, you know, in '64, for fans around here, you had the Razorbacks. They were national champions, but the way they did it back then, they got the champion before the bowls. So Alabama was the champion before the bowls, but Razorbacks got to be there. And one of the interesting parts about that was they beat Texas that year. And going out to the Drake Field, all the 15,000 of us got out there, and they're all over the place. You'd never see that today, and things have changed, as we know, from that type of situation. We also know that the Cardinals, they came back, beat the Yankees, so a lot of good things about the Cardinals. Walmart, 1964. We've had people like Grace McCutcheon. She was one of the first employees, maybe the first one, but she attended church here, and she decided to take stock options, or maybe that's part of what Sam Walton wanted to do, but they were good friends. But that was something that we can think about '64. A lot of people today think about Branson, but when I was in high school, going back then, you know, you went to Rockaway Beach. Branson was just a way to get to somewhere else, whereas Springfield or Rockaway Beach. Things that happened during '64 was Clay beat Liston, and then we had the space program, and as you know, 5 years later they were landing somebody on the moon. And I got a son that was born between the time that somebody was landing on the moon and Woodstock, and I said, well, between those two things, that's probably why you're a lawyer, but that's the way things happened back then. Then we have the Vietnam situation. I think everybody understands what that was all about, and why maybe not what it was all about, the fact it did divide the country. And this is something that's interesting too. I think sometimes we get, and this is maybe what Sam Alexander was talking about the other day. This act prohibits, you know, as far as discrimination, race, color, religion, and national origin. But the funny, or maybe the odd thing is they get a lot of this right, but then if you start thinking about discrimination toward religion, you see that quite often in some of these stance that companies make, and the issues that they faced. And you know, you had Hobby Lobby and Duck Dynasty and Chick-fil-A making quite a bit of news because, you know, they had a position and they were really getting discriminated against, and some people stood up for them, and some of the things has worked out. The other thing in '64 was the first Mustang. Then, you know, look that close, that's a cell phone. I mean, not a cell phone, but actually, you know, it's a mobile phone, I guess, is we kind of developed later on. Now, the thing about today is there's 7 billion of them. You say, well, that's about as many as there are people. Well, the issue there is that some people have 2 or 3, but you can be in a place like this and do something wrong, and you maybe have your picture on Facebook or somewhere else. I mean, just everywhere you go, you're being watched. So people have got a little different situation to deal with. The 8-track. Now, today you could carry the music in your pocket or on your iPhone, so you don't have those anymore. It was a big deal when they went from, obviously, vinyl or the records to that. One of the big songs of '64 was "Everybody Loves Somebody." James Bond was a big thing. The Beatles, that came along, so that was big. As far as computers, I think this is kind of interesting. The 360 computer they show there was worth about $1 million, or it cost you about $1 million. And Bill Gates had to comment about if the car technology or GM had, progressed like the computer, you'd be driving $25 cars that get 1,000 miles to the gallon. Somebody from GM said, well, his Windows, they'd be crashing twice a day, and you'd have to stop and reboot. So there's a little bit of trade-off there. The internet had a different appearance to it. I mean, everybody was speculating on but when you had a mainframe computer and you had other ideas, but does anybody know what this is? All right, Bellefonte Church of Christ. Do you know what happened there 1964, September 3rd, which today is September 3rd? Thursday at 10 o'clock. Well, we'll tell you about it. Got married. So it's been 50 years, and I don't really know yet why we got married at 10 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, but it wasn't my choice to have it then, but, it got you to St. Louis in time to watch a ball game is what somebody said, but it wasn't it. Now, I got a message from Bob Noblet, a friend of ours that we went to church with when he was up in D.C., and he asked if Sandy was wearing her wedding dress, and I said I couldn't find any pictures, but I do have this one picture where she does still wear her dress. The thing we did when we were going up we hit her car, and somebody put Limburger cheese on the motor. So if you really want to get after somebody, I think I can still smell it today. That's one of the things you do to people if they hide their car and you can't get into it. So back then, of course, the Gateway Arch was off to St. Louis. Believe it or not, we spent a lot of time at the Botanical Gardens. It seemed like days, but it's probably several hours anyway. The other part of that is it's kind of a thing of the times is that 1964, a lot of times people, they'd go to the airports because you could walk everywhere on the airport. You could go anywhere, everywhere. You think of it today and all the security, but it was about 5 years later when, they had a lot of hijackings going to Cuba. Then you start seeing a little bit more, but now you can't get in the park or anything. But that's just what I wanted to point out. This is St. Louis Zoo. That's big. Not a selfie, as I said. The other thing was, we did go to a ball game or two, and that was a year when they was playing the Cubs, and later on they come back and, as I say, won the World Series. But one of the things that was interesting about that time, it was a little bit, people that even played ball, they had to have a second job in the off season. You start seeing some of the salaries there. You see a Bob Gibson, he got $30,000. Today he'd probably be $30 million. Mike Shannon there, $7,500. He's on the radio, and he gets more than that just every day he does a radio broadcast. And the tickets range from $200 to $350, so that's changed quite a bit. Really what I wanted to get to is how wedding vows, or really what we do with wedding vows, has changed. And one of the things there, as you can see, back then, and more so, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better and for worse, for richer and for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, for as long as we both shall live. This is kind of the version where you start we talked about the and and the or, and have her to hold from this day forward, and I emphasize for better or for worse, for richer, emphasize there, or for poor, in sickness or in health, to love or to cherish, for as long as we both shall live or until we change our mind. That's pretty much what you see today. And I went over and, got the verse there, Mark 10, 6 through 9. We're all familiar with this. But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man, in this case here, would leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. And the two will become one flesh, so they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate. And I just said, you can make up about anything as to what's going on today. But the beginning of creation, man made male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father or mother, be reunited with a man or wife, and the two will become one flesh, so that they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what man has joined together, let man or God not separate. The trends there, and I think we all see this, is there's a lot of things where people, I guess, are ambivalent about it as far as what's going on in the world. And you can see the transformation. And one of the startling, or maybe the more bigger statistics of this is that 1964, 72% of adults were married and 15% were never married. Now, if you take that on up to 2014 or thereabout, 51%, we're nearly half of adults were married and 28% are never married. And if that trend continues, which there's no reason it won't, when you start talking about 100 years or 50 years from now, 38% of adults will be married and 50% were never married, or will be never married. So that's the direction it seems to be going. Recent survey, and this is kind of the main point, 62% of respondents said they'd like to be mentored by another couple in their church, and 92% said they should especially like to have a mentor to help them through tough times. I know that's some of the discussion you have upstairs with the women, but when you start looking at things and what couples need, and everybody can kind of see their own needs, you have the financial, you have the children. We got a son now that's an elder and a daughter that's an angel. So, when you start thinking about that, it wasn't us that did that, and Sandy probably did a lot of it, but it was the friends we had, Bill and Joyce Collins, or, some of the other people we went to church with, Joe and Joyce Collins with David Collins. So those kind of friends and things are things you need to cultivate. And that's something we got to think about, is when you start going down some of these things. I like the sense of humor part, because Christy, about every time we go anywhere and I say something or we get lost or do something, she'll say, "You're so funny." And sometimes it's sarcasm. Sometimes she just gets tickled, because we got up to Branson the other day and got lost, and she was laughing about it, and I was blaming her. But, that's the other thing you kind of realize here in families, that the father and daughter have a different relationship a lot of times than the mother and the daughter. I mean, I hardly ever hear her say that, and it's not anything, just a relationship there. And that's, sometimes you think of the mother maybe being more the disciplinarian, but that's just kind of the way it works sometimes. But you could go down through and all the different things, and really that's more in the mentor area of going through these different areas. And, death, sometimes that's an issue that we deal with at a time, but something we forget about. So there's a lot of things that you can think about there, and I'm going to close with this. This is, when Christians are left with three options. And if you read through there, the first two are probably not even options, but that's where you're going to be going if you're going to have, 35% or 33rd in church in 50 years. They can yield to the trends devaluing marriage, or they can admit defeat in society but try to maintain traditional teachings inside the church, as you see there on number 3, and I think that's really the only option. Or they can swim against the current and, obviously insist that both church and society obviously trend to stay in a different stay in the same direction. So that's really the only thing I wanted to bring to your attention tonight, and it's been a great 50 years, and you know, these things, you have ups and downs and you have sideways sometimes, but that's just the way it is in these things, and that's the thing I wanted to make the emphasis on, because we do have a lot of young people and a lot of commitments that are being made, and some of those we know will not be kept, but it's an important time of life, and when we reflect back on things that's happened, and with our children or with friends or with people, it's important. I know that the things I've said here tonight may be something that might be an encouragement, or it might be something somebody wants to either they've got some issues in their life that they may want to confess. But at this point, I'd like to have you stand and sing as we invite you to come forward.